most towns, the comic shop is the best indicator of a neighborhood you want to hang out in. There can be in a bookstore in a really fancy neighborhood. There can be a bookstore in a really poor neighborhood. There can be a coffee shop anywhere. You don't know what anything is. Like, the best diners in the world are in neighborhoods where, like, you don't want to be for one reason or the other. But a comic shop, you're always like, there's going to be a coffee shop nearby. There's going to be a cool bookstore. There's going to be a video store. There's going to be a record. Like, they're always situated in most cities in places where you're like, this is a place we can hang out for 4 hours and walk around. So when I was on tour, I was always like, what is the comic shop in town? We're going there. And then even on tour with bands who didn't want comics, they'd be like, well, I'm going to go to this coffee shop. I'm going to go sit in this diner. I'm going to go to this record store. And so I've always gravitated towards comic shops, even when I was like 16, 17, of just being like, I'm in a new town. What are the shops? Where can I go?
Hi, my name is Adam Freeman. This is Comic Industry Insiders, a weekly podcast where I get the pleasure of talking to some of my favorite people behind the scenes in the comic book industry, the people you don't often hear from, the people that kind of make this whole thing go around. We also get to learn what makes them tick, what things they've learned, the things that you can take to your business or career in comics. That's what I usually do. Sure. This week, I'm talking to one of the biggest writers in comics, who I'm pretty sure I told her was never going to have a career as a writer, if I remember that conversation right. Anyway, Matthew Rosenberg he's a man of many, many talents, and I am so looking forward to digging into them, because I have had the pleasure of watching Matthew from really legitimately the beginning of his stellar writing career in comics to today, and I've always considered him to be a friend. And I welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adam. This is an honor and a privilege. I'm not going to comment on how many episodes you've done before you got to me. We don't have to talk about that. We don't have to dig in. It's fine. No grudges.
Listen, I wanted it to be about the people behind the scenes,
No,
and you were not willing to just stay behind the scenes. You had to have the limelight, right?
Yeah.
Everything about you says, I need to be the star.
And... Yeah, 100%. That's why this is my first interview in like 9 months, because I'm just scrambling for attention all the time.
Yeah. But it's not your first. You've been doing interviews, right? You have the podcast now?
Yeah, I have a podcast, but that's sort of the opposite. First of all, around 10 minutes before this, I had a full-on, like, my heart started racing, and I was like, I didn't write any questions for Adam. And then I was like, oh wait, no, I'm on his podcast. Like, so my muscle memory is all out the door. So like, this might be horrible. And yeah, I have a podcast called Ideas Don't Bleed, with my buddies Ethan S. Parker and Griffin Sheridan, who are comics writers. They made the excellent Kill Your Darlings at Image, Eisner nominated. And they are actual podcasters who know what they're doing and how to record a podcast and set it up. And I am a guy who knows a few people in comics and can call them and harass them to come talk to me for an hour. So I don't consider myself a podcaster particularly, but I do have a podcast.
I enjoy it. I like how conversational it is. I like that you allow the conversation to breathe. I think that's part of what we're trying to do here. What I don't like is when it gets over an hour, you break it into 2 episodes. I think that's a real pansy move. Like, make them sit through it.
Here's the thing. We break it into 2 episodes. The podcast was originally funded by Substack, which is our home. And I had a contract with Substack that said I had to have a guaranteed amount of content. And a cheap workaround was to take hour-long podcasts and split them into 2 podcasts. I love Substack, and it's a great platform. And I'm actually like very thankful for everything they gave us the opportunity to do, and the audience that we continue to find on there. But yeah, it's a little bit of a. I'm also like, I live in New York City, so I work from home. But even when I didn't work from home, like, I don't have an hour commute. So like, an hour-long podcast is hard for me to wrap my head around. And all the time people are like, I drive for 3 hours a day. Like, I wish your fucking podcast was longer. And I just like, well, sorry, we call it a doing laundry podcast.
Like, yeah, I like it. Yeah, it is doing laundry. Unless you're having to take your laundry to the laundromat.
Yeah, if it's a full like waiting in the laundromat, no, this is not the podcast for you. Yeah,
that's 3 hours.
It's exactly the opposite podcast for that. Yeah, we're doing laundry if you have your own washing machine or dryer, which in New York City is rare. So I don't know. We didn't really figure it out. It's not well planned. Yeah,
I do want to dig into a little more about the Substack deal, and this is actually a good opportunity because you and I didn't lay any ground rules. We didn't talk about stuff we were going to talk about ahead of time or anything like that. I realized that I didn't even give you like the speech which I normally give people, which is make sure that if there's something you do want to talk about, you let me know, and if there's something you don't want to talk about, let me know. Yep. Because frankly, if we do find something we don't want to talk about, I'm going to enjoy watching you squirm.
Sure,
that'd be fun.
I can't imagine what that would be like. I can't imagine what I wouldn't want to talk about, but also not. I don't have anything I need to talk about. Let's just go. Let's just go.
Good. Well, what I was going to say was because this is such a business focused, right?
Sure.
Such an industry focused podcast. You do a great job of promoting yourself and the books that you're on. And
thank you.
if you watch the Dave Baker episode, I went on and on about the book that I was reading, but I didn't I kept forgetting to let him promote. So at any time you want to stop and give a pitch on a book, you just let me know and I'll back off because I'm happy to listen to your pitch. That's all I'm saying.
DC versus Vampires is I don't know. I write DC versus Vampires. It's got, do you want to see a bunch of vampires fight a bunch of superheroes? We do that. It's cool. It's fun.
Who doesn't? It's always good.
It's Halloween
zombies,
today,
man.
It is. When you listen to this, it won't be Halloween, but hopefully the spirit of spookiness will still embody you, and you'll go out and buy the 3 collected editions of DC versus Vampires and the 3 issues that are out now, unless the 4th issue is out. But I don't think it is. I think only 3 are out.
Got it.
Yeah, that's correct. There you go. It's the best plug I got.
I love it. All right. So I wanted to start with something that I think that, I'm sure you must be asked a lot. When you bleed, does it come out with cocoa? Is there anything that you consume on a daily basis that is not chocolate flavored? Because this must be your favorite holiday with all the
okay, here's the interesting thing. This is a misconception about me. I love a chocolate milk. I'm a man with a refined palate. I love a milkshake. I like a Yoo-hoo or a chocolate water, as they're called.
You do like an egg cream.
I love an egg cream. That's true. Yes. Yeah, it's in the same family.
It's the worst version of the Yoo-hoo, but it's fine.
Egg creams are outstanding, and most of your audience is not going to have any idea what an egg cream is because it's really a New York drink. But
it truly is. And if you're not from New York, if you come to New York from the outside, you're going to look at New Yorkers like they're nuts when they tell you need to try an egg cream because it's frankly kind of awful. But anyway,
it's chocolate milk soda. It's carbonated chocolate.
It truly is. Yeah,
it's great. But I'm not a big chocolate guy. I don't particularly like chocolate, so I'm not I'll eat candy and stuff, but I'm not. I don't ever really buy a chocolate bar or hunt that down. So people come and bring me chocolates, and I'm always it's very sweet, it's very nice. I'm very appreciative, but I kind of don't want them.
You only take in your chocolate in liquid form. I respect that. It's a standard for you.
Hydration is important. The body runs on hydration. A chocolate milk has all the nutrients you need. Calcium. I haven't broken a lot of bones in my life, which is impressive because I have strong bones from the milk.
I'm all for it. I'm all for it as a lifestyle. I wanted to dig into this to start. I generally like to start with, something about you that we haven't heard yet. And I will tell you, I did a lot of research. I've known you for quite a while. We have a lot of mutual friends.
True.
I know that you were, in bands and that you were part of the hardcore scene.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know much about your early life though, and there's really not a whole lot available that I have found.
That's on purpose, yeah.
Well, so here we go. You tell me if we're going to flag this and say
no, we don't need to flag it. I didn't kill anybody. I'm fine.
All right. Have you always lived in New York?
I was born and raised in New York, in Manhattan, which people are always like, ooh. I don't know why, but people go, ooh, about Manhattan. I grew up here. My parents, my mom is originally from New Jersey, the great state of New Jersey. My dad's from Massachusetts. They both moved here for college, career stuff, and settled down. And I was born in Manhattan and was raised there. And I always lived there, except I lived, my dad was a writer. And so there was a period of time early in my life where he was working on a lot of stuff that was being made in Canada. And he was a head writer on a bunch of Canadian American crime shows. So he was doing 6 or 8 months a year in Canada. And so I was doing both. I was like a bi-coastal kid, except for the coasts being the Hudson River and Lake Ontario.
Yeah.
So I lived in Toronto. I never went to school there or anything. I wasn't a citizen, but I spent a lot of time growing up in Toronto.
Is that your dad being a writer? Is that a big part of how you made this this attempt? Is it like, can you sing that? Do you think that's where it came from?
Well, both of my parents were writers. My mom, by the time I was born, was pretty much out of. She was a writer and she was a book editor for a long time, and she was pretty much out of the game and just raising a family and being a homemaker. But yeah, my dad was a career writer, lifelong writer. It's how I've afforded to go to school and eat and have a roof over my head. And yeah, my dad wrote for TV and kept crazy hours and was super prolific. And he is the most prolific TV movie writer of all time, which was not a
Really?
Yes. It was not a claim to fame he was super proud of, because it's not what he set out to do. He wrote 11 novels and a book of essays and a lot of TV, and then TV movies sort of found him, and that was just a lucrative thing for him. But because he kept those long hours, I vowed as a child that writing was the one thing I did not want to do.
Of course.
I didn't see my dad. He seemed stressed out all the time. I would spending time with my dad for a lot of my childhood was, if he was in the same city as me, it was going and sitting in his office and playing records while he worked, and couldn't talk. That would be distracting, but I could put on records. And so, no, I spent years trying desperately not to be a writer, not to be in that field. And I worked I love music and wanted to work in music. I have almost no musical ability whatsoever. Like I'm a better bass player or drummer than a toddler.
But not all toddlers. Like,
no, obviously there's gifted. I don't want to cast aspersions. There's very talented toddlers. There's toddlers, yeah, but your average toddler, if in a drum off, I'm gonna beat him. I was a good enough bass player to play in a punk band where our guitar player and our drummer and our singer didn't know how to do their jobs either, so no one noticed that I was ruining it. But if I was with good musicians, I would have ruined it.
Yeah.
And I went from there. I was booking shows in New York, all over the city at different clubs, and at age 17, and touring with bands. I went on my first national tour at age 16. I just jumped in a band with some guys I didn't know. That I knew they needed a merch guy, and I was like, I can sell T-shirts, and I went with them. And from there, I've been to 48 states and 19 countries, 20, maybe 21 countries on tour.
Wow.
I know how to smuggle shirts in if they're counting merch at the door. I know how to sneak people in the back door of a club. I know how to stop security from beating up your band. I know how to find your drummer in Amsterdam and make sure he gets in the van. I can change strings. I can tune a drum set. I can do anything you can need to do musically that doesn't involve having musical ability. So
yeah, I got you right. No, you're a fixer.
I'm a fixer. Yeah. I'm like the end of Pulp Fiction, but not cool or smooth. No one's pleased that I'm there. I'm not a reassuring presence, but people put up with it. And then I ran a record label.
Rosenberg's coming. That's all you had to say.
That's all you had to say. I don't know how to drive. I know how to drive. I don't have a license, specifically because I grew up in New York, and I never wanted to be stuck driving the tour van, because driving tour vans is terrifying and awful. And so I was just like, I don't have a license. Like, you take me. I'm a great co-pilot. I can read a map when that was a thing.
Yeah.
I can stay up all night, so I'm a great companion. I'm a good DJ on the radio. but don't know how to drive, so I was never a driver. And then the other thing I did is I ran a record label out of my living room for a decade, like an indie punk hardcore label.
I love this part. My partner was a hardcore kid, and her ex-husband, they had their own label. I've heard
Mhm.
so many stories about this period, and just the I don't know. I think you're slightly younger than she is, but so much of what they were doing was like, it was pre-internet, but they kind of developed their own network
Sure,
way
yeah.
of communicating, like through zines and
Oh yeah.
through
You,
payphones and all of that. It was
oh
incredible.
yeah. I mean, like it's hard to sort of explain. I at some point would love to do the like 90s 80 90s punk rock tour
Hmm.
experience, like where you got dialers, because I don't think kids have no idea what dialers are, but
I know.
dialers are like, for those of you young ones at home, dialer's a device that replicates the sound of a coin being dropped into a payphone, and so you hit the button and you can make free phone calls on a payphone. And that was like, if you're in a touring band, you have a dialer. Like you just need to.
Yeah.
You need. No one had cell phones. No one had anything. But yeah, there was resources. There was like Maximum Rock and Roll, the great punk zine, made Book Your Own Fucking Life, which was like literally a list of resources of like, these are people who have shows. These are people who make shirts. These are people who, and it was for the whole country, maybe the whole world. Um, but also just like, these are places you can sleep. These are vegan friendly restaurants you can eat at. These are people who will give you a meal when you don't have money on tour. And that was sort of the life. And then it was just knowing people and networking and cold calling band. I mean, the number of bands who've stayed at, slept on my floor just because I was a guy that people knew. I was like, well, I have a house, I have an apartment in New York, and it has, a couple bedrooms and a couple couches, and
Yeah.
a lot of not famous people, a couple famous people, but a lot of if you were into that scene, there was a lot of bands who passed through who were sleeping on my couch all the time.
Which is, I mean, that in and of itself is incredible to me, that there was this network of, like, she will tell stories about them touring Europe,
Oh sure.
doing like European tours with the band and staying in people's houses,
Of
people that
course.
they have only really met, on the phone and through zines and those kinds of listings. It's incredible to me to think about this reality.
It's incredible to think about in a lot, like I grew up in it, so it doesn't feel surreal. And then sometimes I go and I think about things, and I went and saw the Fugazi documentary Instrument a couple
Yeah.
months ago. They were screening it, and Guy from Fugazi was there, and Jem Cohen, the director, was there, and they were just talking about like the DC hardcore scene, which is before my time, but they were talking about how, like, Rollins is there and Ian MacKay's there, and Bad Brains are there and all these things. And a lot of them are 16 and 17 and making these records that are like, they're booking shows with 500 kids there and stuff. And that was,
Yeah.
uh, my experience on a smaller scale, but because that blueprint was there from so many people. Like obviously the same scene was in LA, the same scene was in a bunch
Yeah.
of places. Like, yeah, it's a very youth run thing, and it's very much just about a community and trust. And obviously there's bad actors and there's, horror stories come out of it, but for the most part, it is a place where people's common interests build an actual community. And that's sort of why I always sort of laugh at comics when they're like comics community, and I'm like, comics isn't really a community. Like it's not in that way. There are
Yeah.
communities in comics, but
It could
like
be, but
it
it
could
really isn't.
it
Yeah.
could be. And I feel like there are segments of it. I feel like
Sure.
a lot of like zine and mini comics kids are more of a
Yeah.
community and are like, running print studios together and running collectives and doing distro together. But like, you know, James Tynan is one of my best friends. We're not in a community. We're just grown-ups who hang out and make books. Like there's not that sense of community. Community means a very different thing to me than when people say comics community. And I always try and sort of foster some of that. I try and be a good community member for the community I'd like comics to be, but I don't think it's really ingrained into it.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, and I think that there is a certain amount of, there may be these pockets that we're just not seeing. Someone was asking me today about this TikTok account where he's talking about his comics that he's selling, and
Sure.
that he's charging $10 per signature. You've never heard of this guy, but he's charging $10 a signature for these books. And I'm looking at this and thinking, well, I mean, his culture, the culture they're growing inside of these TikTok comics is its own entity.
Sure.
It's its own network, right?
Oh,
Its
for
own
sure.
industry, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm very, being both a punk, growing up as a punk, where you're sort of always being like, well, the coolest stuff already happened. If you weren't in, if I
Yeah.
wasn't in London in 77 and I wasn't in the, at CBGB's in 75 and whatever, LA in 81, DC in 81, like I missed a lot of it. And I feel the same often about comics when you hear like, oh, Dave Sim would rent out the entire floor of
Right.
the Hilton Bayfront, and like, it would just be catered 24 hours a day because Dave Sim was doing so much, and like the Hernandez brothers would be there, and like all these things where you're just like, oh, that's a scene, that's a community, and that's awesome. Like you see all those pictures that are just like, like Peter Bagg and the Hernandez brothers and Kevin Eastman hanging out, and you're like, what was that hangout? Like, and you're just like, oh, they just hung out. Like, that's just guys.
It was just them.
Yeah.
But again, you have that, right? There's some 16-year-old looking at pictures of you and James Tinian. I never feel confident saying his last name. Tynan.
He didn't make it easier by naming his company a thing that isn't.
I know.
Doesn't sound like.
It's really annoying.
It's great. I love it.
Yeah.
No, for sure. And I think, I see it sometimes when people talk about, because I was lucky enough to sort of make friends with a bunch of people who were aspiring comic creators, and we came up together. So like Frank Barberi, Steve Orlando, Chris Sabella, Josh Williamson, James Tynan, and then I worked in a shop, and the people who worked in my shop, it was very quickly clear who were the people who were like, you're going to be making comics. And we sort of all bonded. And so there's a bunch of us who are comic creators who all worked at the same job. And I tell that story sometimes, and I see young comic creators be like envious. And I get it. Like, it sucks that I was, friends with James before either of us had published a comic, because now, I can be like, I have a famous comics friend or whatever. And it sucks that like me and Tyler worked, in a comic shop 40 hours a week together, and people are like, how do you find artists? And I'm like, I don't know. He was like, we took the train home every day together. Like, he was really good at drawing. He was
which came first for you? Was it Forbidden Planet or making comics themselves?
So I was running the label and hit a point where I was like, okay, I need an actual job, and was starting to get burnt out on music, which was terrifying to me. I called a bunch of friends who ran record labels, and I was like, how do you keep excited about like going to shows and listening to new records? And they were like, all my friends who had labels were like, oh, I don't fucking go to shows for fun. They were like, I don't go buy records for fun. I go to shows if I have to meet a band or network or do something, get a favor. And that terrified me, because music was an ever-present thing. And so I was like, I have to get out of music. And I'd gotten a job. I was running a merch printing company. A guy I knew from music was like, hey, I need someone to manage this company. And I was like, okay. And it was a really good job. But I was trying to find something else that could be my passion. And I was like, the only other thing I care about as much as music is comics. And I knew nothing about making comics. Like, literally never dawned on me. Didn't know anyone who made comics. Didn't know anything about it. Was just like, they have writers.
You're just a fan.
I was a fan, lifelong fan. And was just like, someone makes them. The thing that actually ticked for me was Steve Niles. Because I was a Steve Niles fan, and I love 30 Days a Night. I love, Cal McDonald stuff. I just was reading everything he was doing. I thought he was cool. And then I found out that he was in the DC hardcore band Grey Matter, whose records I owned. And when I was a kid, he was almost in Fugazi. He was like in that scene. And I was like, oh, I own this guy's records. And even though I didn't know Steve at all, that was the in for me. That was the like, oh, you can do this. You can go from one field to the other. They're not that different. And so, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Steve Niles sort of carving the path he carved.
I had
But
no idea about that. I've known Steve for, lots of years because I
sure.
had a shop in LA and we got to know Steve a little bit. And I keep I was just telling somebody that I got this close to having, with an early iteration of what this is now.
Mhm.
I was doing some weird content stuff back in like 2008, 2009, and trying to do comics culture stuff. And Steve said, "Why don't you come and film the my weekly Scrabble game with Bernie Wrightson?"
Jeez.
And I went, "Okay, sure."
Yeah.
And it didn't happen.
Oh,
Yeah,
heartbreaker.
I know. Anyway, sorry. Yeah.
No,
I'm
that's
with you. I
that.
love Steve, but I had no idea about that. Him being a musician doesn't surprise me, having
Yeah, yeah.
spent time with Steve. But
He
yeah,
was in Gray Matter when he was a kid. They're awesome bands. Like if you like the early Discord stuff, and Rites of Spring and Teen Idols and stuff like that. Gray Matter fits right in there. They're a great band. Like they're just an awesome band that I still love dearly. Um, and so I was like, I want to make comics, and I had this job running this merch company, but it was a real job. It was like probably a career job, and I was making a lot of money. I didn't have a lot of bills. I was living in an apartment that I didn't pay rent in, and just had more money, and was stupid, and was like, well, I was putting this all into making records, and maybe I don't want to do that, so maybe I can make comics. And then I just hit a point where I was like, I can't make comics because I'm working 60 hours a week at this job, and I'm coming home exhausted, and like it's bleeding into my free time. Like I have to sort problems and figure things out when I'm not at work. And so I was, I just said, like, I have to quit and get a job where I can just be around comics and immersed in comics. And I grew up. I shopped at Midtown and Forbidden Planet. Those were my shops. Still are my shops. My local guys. Some of them. I shop at every shop, but and I applied for jobs at both, and had a bunch of interviews at Midtown to be Gall's assistant.
oh yeah,
The buyer at Midtown. Yeah, yeah. And I was very excited about it. And I came into my final meeting, and they were like, "You're not right for this job. We want you for something else." And I was like, "What?" And they were like, "We're thinking of this other business, and you'd be good for that. You have a good brain for this stuff." And it had to do with stuff I was doing in the past. And I was like, "Oh, but I just want to do this." And they were like, "It's just really data entry. Like you're actually like have a job experience and life experience." And I was like, "That's
yeah,
fine. I just want a job where I'm like around comics." And they were like, "You kind of wouldn't be. You kind of just be around spreadsheets." And so I was like, "Okay." And I was like, "But I do actually need a job." So like,
yeah.
and they were like, "It's going to be a few months." And I was like, "Well, I'll go get this job at, I'll go see." And Forbidden Planet, Jeff, the manager of Forbidden Planet,
Yep.
had an interview with him, and he hired me that day, and I started work, and that was it. So yeah, I wanted to make comics before that, and was trying to flailing around, but sort of needed more brain space and more free time, and Forbidden Planet afforded me that.
That makes a lot of sense. So you hadn't really started making comics
Uh,
themselves until you started at Forbidden Planet?
we were doing like, I was doing pitches and like ash cans to try and
Hmm.
get publishers excited. It was a very different landscape. Like this is, a decade, a little over a decade ago. Um, there was a time, I mean, I don't have to explain this to you or probably most people, but like if you were trying to make comics, there was like 8 companies who could pay you to do that. It was
Yeah,
really, really thin. It was,
yeah,
you got your Image, you got your Boom, you got your Dark Horse, Oni, um, Vertigo, and then you have like a few others on the side. Like, I was a big fan of like AIT, Planet Lar, like that stuff, and
yeah.
slave labor was just sort of going away. And I knew I wasn't going to be like a Fantagraphics DNQ guy. Like I love that stuff, but like that wasn't what I was going to be making. Um, and so I was doing a lot of pitches to send to people that were like, a 5-page thing, and were kind of maybe awful, and the and you'd send them out, and I had 8 points of contact at the 8 companies, and I would send them out, and I would get 7 complete silences,
Yeah.
and that was just it. You'd be like, okay, I spent 2 months on that and a few $1,000s, and 7 people never said anything, so I'm on to the next
Next.
one. Yeah. So I was doing that when I got the job at Forbidden Planet.
I got you.
And yeah.
So, at what point is Black Mask your first hit?
Black Mask is my first. Well, no, I did a web comic on. Dean Haspiel had a Activate,
Right.
which was like a webcomics site community. That was a community.
Yeah.
When we talk about comics community, like Dean built a community, and a lot of people were doing stuff. And my buddy Chris Miscavige, who's a writer, great writer,
I know Chris. He's
yeah,
fantastic.
fantastic,
It's a lot of fun.
true lunatic, love him.
Truly.
And he met me at Forbidden Planet and like saw some of my stuff and was like, you should send this to Dean, like I'll intro you. And I sent it to Dean, and Dean was like, yeah, we published this. So I was doing a web comic on there, and then it wasn't Activate had changed, like some of the people from Activate had left, so it was called Trip City, I think.
Right.
It had morphed into, but it was still Dean at the helm and a few other people. And then and then I got hooked up with the Black Mask guys. Well, it was complicated because I was talking to Black Mask because it was like a trilogy of people that I had tentative connections to running Black Mask when they were starting it, because it was Steve Niles, who like I had reached out to as a fan and sort of, whatever. And then Brett Gurwitz, who is a guitar player in Bad Religion and owns Epitaph Records. And so I didn't know Brett, but like Epitaph was, when you run a punk label, like Epitaph is the biggest in the room. They're one of the largest independent record labels in the world. And so I knew people at Epitaph, and so I knew him. And then the head of Black Mask, the day-to-day guy, was Matt Pizzolo, who grew up in Long Island as a Long Island hardcore kid. And so I didn't know him, but he was good friends with a lot of my good friends. And so it was very easy to like sort of get an introduction when they were like, we're starting a company. And they were doing an anthology for Occupy Wall Street. They were doing an Occupy Comics anthology, which was like a crowdfunding to benefit Occupy movement. And I just, kicked and screamed and begged to, I was like, I'm a New York guy. Like, this is, politically aligned with me. Yeah. Like, let's, I was like, my really good friend is the Occupy movement's lawyer. Like my brother's girlfriend spent 2 nights in prison in jail on this. Like, let me go. Like, I've been down to the camps. Like, let me do something. And they let me do something and whatever. But then at that time also, a project fell in my lap because I ended up doing a bunch of stuff with guys from the Wu-Tang Clan,
right?
Which was weird. And that someone in the music business knew that I was like a music guy to a comic guy, and they were looking for a comics guy, and they were like, this guy will know what you're talking about. And so this guy who was RZA's manager at the time reached out to me and didn't explain who he was, but was just like, can I take you to lunch to talk about comics? And I was like, you paying? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, sure, man.
Let's go.
It was that level of like, money's getting tight here. Like, is this a free lunch? Like, he could have just said anything and be like, I'm buying you lunch. And, I would be like, let's go. So we went out to lunch and we talked about comics for an hour. And then I was like, what is this thing? And he's like, oh, I'm doing a thing with RZA and Ghostface from Wu-Tang. And I was like, oh, everything I just said to you is wrong. Like, everything I said was about like an unknown artist that has no fan base. I was like, you can sell this as a comic. And he was like, okay, you want to make it? And I was like, yes. And then I had a property with no home. And I scrambled around and met with publishers because I suddenly had something that maybe they wanted. And we met with a bunch of publishers and it was great. We met with Eric at Image and talked to Oni about it, Charlie at Oni. And Black Mask was just the fit. We were going to go with Image and we couldn't make it work on our end, what they needed. It was
already have an Image book? That Nine
they
Wings.
They did in the 90s, and they were not.
Yeah,
they were not happy. Pleased with. I tried to explain to them. I was like, the Image doesn't work the way you think it works. Like, it's not. The company did not wrong you in any way. The company doesn't wrong people. Like, you had liaisons who maybe wronged you in dealing with the company, but like the company is like as straight shooters as they come. And I talked them into it, and then what Image needed, we couldn't do. So we went. Black Mask was like, we'll fucking move heaven and earth to make this happen, and they did. So we ended up doing that, and so that's how I got my start in publishing books. I had an anthology short in Occupy Comics, and then I wrote 12 Reasons to Die, 6 issues, which is in a trade now, and I actually went on to co-write a record with Ghostface after that, but that's another weird story.
Don't you have a story, and you feel free to, tell me not to skip this part, but don't you have a story about needing to get signatures?
I do. When we said at the start, I can't imagine things I don't want to tell. That is one that maybe doesn't go out on the air. Ghost was great. Ghost was always great and very professional. It is when you're at that level and do the stuff they do, there's a lot of people who need a lot of things from you or want a lot of things from you.
Yeah.
And so they have a lot of people around them who are like, you have to get past me to get to them. And this was a thing of like, we needed to get to Ghostface in Chicago, and his crew was not interested in us doing that. And yeah, it doesn't. I don't think the story needs to go further than that.
That's
There's a couple like RZA is amazing, and it was like he's a presence that is really like humbling to be around, because you're like, this is just an intellect that works on a different level. Like, I sat in the studio with him a lot of nights while he's at 3 a.m. he's doing interviews with NPR reporters who are just yawning and exhausted because he's made them come in at 3 a.m. to do interviews. He's like listening to things, he's approving art, like he's just like literally turning from person to person and being like, next, what do you need? So he's doing like one interview question and then turning, and people will be like, how's this sound? And he'll be like, move that snare drum up in eighth measure. And then he'll just like turn and it was like, I've never seen anything like it. It was some of the most impressive, just like multitasking, and just like everything he did well, and everyone was like, oh Jesus, yeah, that's right. Like, just impressive dudes all around, obviously. But there are some weird stories from that time that are not podcast stories.
All right, fine. Well, I appreciate you skirting around the edges, and I've heard this about RZA as well. He just was a once in a lifetime talent.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so you're at Black Mask. You're selling at Forbidden Planet. At this point, I think it's probably the time to talk about how you and I first meet.
Sure.
Which is, at the time, I'm running the sales department for Valiant.
Yes.
Valiant Entertainment, and we're crewing up this like call team because we want to start calling shops on a regular basis and hitting a lot of them. And I started asking around, which is what I do a lot, to shops. Who do you have that's that is good, that is ready to move up, maybe into publishing if they want? And your name came up, and so I call you and I talk. And we had like 2 or 3 phone conversations, and you were yeah, this is. I mean, it's interesting, but I just think I want to focus on being a writer. And I'm like, are you sure? I'm offering you benefits.
That is not how I remember it. Because you were coming into the shop a lot. You were great. Yeah. You would come in and be like, hey, do you have enough copies of this? Like, this came out this week. Do you want some posters? And I was just a huge fan of what you guys were doing. Like, I very much, like, I'm a Josh Dysart loyalist. Like, I'm a
all day.
Yeah, just like one of the great writers of all time in comics.
Truly.
You were just doing cool stuff with, Greg Pak and Van Lente and all these people doing cool books, and that I was really into. And so I was selling the hell out of them. And I think probably, if Forbidden Planet recommended me, it was equal parts like, this guy actually reads the books and is hand selling them, with, we really don't want this guy to work here anymore, so can you take him off our hands?
I doubt that.
But so you came in a bunch of times and we'd met, and then we had some calls, and then I came to the office a few times.
That's right.
I came to the office, and
forgotten about that.
My recollection of it is, I met with you, I met with Dinesh, I met with Fred, I met with everybody. I remember the big thing was that Dinesh was like, if you could do anything to change the direction of the company, improve the direction, what would you do? And I was like, I'm going to take a fucking swing here, and maybe this is a bad answer. And I was like, you guys have played Moneyball better than anyone. Like, just finding the good writers, the good artists who are underappreciated at the big two, excuse me, and giving them a pedestal, letting them cut loose, and just doing awesome with that. I was like, now that you have a stage, you need some fucking impressive names. You need to come out next and be like, we can have a number 4 hitter who's a home run. And you guys all looked at each other, and then Dinesh was like, this doesn't leave the room. And you had a like some Paulo Rivera art and a teaser that was like Jeff Lemire's coming or whatever. And I was like, oh, okay. And I think that was like a good moment for me, that I was like, well, all right, we're thinking on the same page here.
Yeah.
And then
you're on the right frequency, right?
My recollection of it is that I was presented a contract. I was presented an offer to work.
Okay.
And you were like, oh, you just have to sign this or whatever. And Dinesh said, just so we're clear, you know that if you do this, you can't write for anyone else.
Oh,
and I was like, I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, well, if you're a Valiant employee, like, we can't have you out promoting other books at other publishers, which makes perfect sense, but had never occurred to me.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I just have to think about this and whatever. And I left the office, and
That's
you
right.
called me before I got on the subway. You called me within 2 blocks, because the office was in Midtown. Office was in like the 30s. And I was walking to Times Square to get on the train, and you called me within the 7-minute walk, and you just said, I answered, and you said, I just lost you, didn't I? And I said, I think so, man. I don't think I can do this. And I had a full-blown panic attack about it, because I was like, this is a step. This is the step I should be taking. And I'm like trying to view 10 steps ahead and hoping to will 10 steps ahead into place. And I'm not taking the steps I need to take. And this is really dumb of me. Like, this is a bad idea. And cute. This is but just like, I was really nervous and really stressed about it. And also stressed because you had gone to bat for me. And I was like, oh, this is someone in the industry who I like, who's cool, who's good at their job, who went to bat for me. And so I called you and was like, there's a guy you should take who worked at Forbidden Planet. You should take Matthew Klein. Like, he's the better version of me. And I freaked out. I said no. And then 4 days later, I got an email from Jake Thomas, an editor at Marvel, who was like, hey, do you want to do a 10-page story for us? And it felt like, you don't get a lot of those moments where you're like, I'm betting on myself here, and I really want this to pay off. And there's a lot of moments where you bet on yourself and it doesn't. It's most moments. And this was one where I had that moment where I was like, oh, it paid off. If I had signed that paper to work at Valiant, I would literally have to email a Marvel editor and be like, I don't want to write an X-Men story. Sorry. Bye. So
dude, that's an amazing story.
Yeah. It's I'm so appreciative, though, because it showed me that I was like, oh, I'm not just like a dude who likes comics. Like, people who are making comics that I like think that I might be useful in this industry, and then I might have a place in the industry. And so I've always been really appreciative of you and the Valiant team for like giving me a shot and everything. It really meant a lot. Also, at the time I was like doing these pitches, and like I had the Black Mass stuff at that point, but up until that point I was pitching stuff to nobody, like I said. And like, that's the most demoralizing thing I've ever been through in my life. And so,
it's gotta be the worst. It's gotta be the worst.
It's incredibly hard. It's just brutal to just like the silence. And I understand why you get the silence, because people everyone's overworked, everyone is underpaid, no one has the time to answer everything and just be like, hey, this isn't for us. And also then you're making enemies, and you're getting people who are going to argue with you, and I've seen it firsthand. And so I understand, but the silence is just a little death each time. And so like, I was at a low, even though I was like starting to publish stuff, I was at a real low. And then like, I got stuff at Black Mask, and you were like, hey, you should come work with me. And I was like, oh, maybe I didn't make the worst fucking decision of my life, quitting my 6-figure merch printing job to come work in a comic shop.
Well, I'm
jury's
so
still
glad.
out, but
we'll see.
Yeah.
You could, if you were still there, where would you be now? I mean, that could be, get through that
homeless.
Math. Yeah. Well, so tell me. So you start there. Can I tell you, in doing the research for this, I listened to a bunch of your podcasts, and one of the Shut up. One of the stories that caught me off guard that I really loved was you telling the story about your mom buying the first copy of your
Yeah.
first book,
Yeah,
which I
yeah.
assume is this one that the editor reached
No,
out
it
to
was
you
actually
for.
the second thing I did, which is I did
Okay.
for Marvel, I did a Quake one shot
Yeah.
for, super. I love Quake as a character. I think she's great. Bendis creation, just really fun. It's a really good era of Avengers, and that she's appearing in Secret Wars, like she's great. And they, called me into the office and were like, "Do you want to do this one shot? We're doing a Shield anniversary thing." And I was like, "Can I do Nick Fury?" And they were like, "No." And I was like, "Can I do Mockingbird?" And they were like, "No." And I was like, "Can I do?" And I just went through Shield agents, and they were like, "What's left is Quake or one of the characters from the TV show who'd never been in a comic." And I was like, "I'll take Quake. Like I love Quake. Like that's cool."
I am so ready for this quick
I,
one shot. This is
I
the thing I've been waiting for.
It's yeah. It's basically I'm going to retire after this. Like I've hit everything on the bucket list. But I did really like the character. So I was like, well, that's a relief because I don't really know who the other character is. And I wrote this one shot, and my mom, being a very sweet and supportive mom and a wonderful lady, went to her local comic shop and went in and bought 2 copies of it and was checking out. And the clerk was like, "Oh, you're getting 2 of these?" And she was like, "My son wrote it." And the clerk just went, "Quake's terrible. He should have done Mockingbird." And my mom has no idea what any of this means and calls me from the parking lot and was like, "Why did he say that?" And I was like, "In comics shop, people are opinionated. Like it's a passion run industry, and we're
Yeah.
passionate people." And so, and she's like, I go to, my mom's big into knitting and weaving and stuff. And she's like, I go to the yarn store. No one has ever told me the yarn I'm buying sucks. And I was like, yeah, no, it's a different thing. And she's like, I bought groceries my whole life. No one has ever been like, broccoli sucks. You should get kale. And I'm like, no, Mom, you're correct. It is a weird thing to go and buy a thing, and as you pay for it, have the person who sells it to you say that it sucks to you.
Exactly. It's such a strange experience.
And
You're right.
It's very weird if your son is the inventor of broccoli. It's even more awkward and weird.
He came up with a new brand of broccoli.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so it's that was and I immediately was like, "Mom, don't ever go back there. I will give you a copy of everything I ever do. You don't have to worry about it." And I would go out every time I published a book, I'd go buy a copy, and when I'd see my mom, I'd bring her a box until she was like, "Hey, you need to stop doing this. I can't have all these."
It's enough.
She said at one point, she's like, "Do you expect me to keep these?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, we're having a different conversation. No, okay. I don't expect that. Yeah, it's fine." She likes the creator-owned book. She likes the collected editions. She was like, she's like, more Punisher? I don't think I need more Punisher. And I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah. I found out she was giving books to, like, she'd buy birdseed for her bird feeder. Someone was giving books to the guy at the birdseed store and just being like, my son makes this. And like, that literally I was in the supermarket with her once, and the clerk checking out, she was like, "This is my son." And he was like, "Punisher, huh?" And I was like, "Mom, this is not a normal reaction to things." And she's like, "I give everyone the books." And I was like, "Oh, I'm going out and giving these to you, and you are desperately trying to get them out of your house."
No, she's treating them like they're chick tracts. She's giving them out. Is like she's evangelizing.
Yeah, she's
the gospel of Rosenberg.
The gospel of the Punisher, unfortunately. She's like, "My son writes this. He's got issues. He's a disturbed young man. Mm-hmm. Check it out."
Yeah.
So yeah.
So you're all right. So you're at Marvel. You finally get your place in Marvel. Have you been at Marvel pretty much sporadically ever since?
No, I was at Marvel 6 years. I was exclusive for 4 of them. Basically until the pandemic. I was at Marvel through the pandemic, and then I wanted to I wasn't exclusive anymore, and I wanted to see what else was out there, and so I switched teams, and I joined Team DC. I went over to Burbank. I was sick of working at a company in New York. I wanted to work at a company that used to be in New York. And so I was at Marvel for 6 years, though. I wrote, I don't know, 150, 160 books for them, something like that.
When I'm Googling you, I'm trying to like stay really high level and kind of scratch behind the scenes so that I'm not just like doing a deep dive on the characters that you've written and that sort of stuff.
But let's just talk about Quake somewhere.
No, I do really want to talk. We should do it. We should do an entire episode about Quake. I think
I could. I love Quake. I do love Quake, and I wrote Quake in a book after that. I wrote 12 issues of a Quake book. I think I put her in other stuff too. Maybe I didn't. Oh no, she's in Punisher. She appears in Punisher too. Huh. I've written like 16. I think the only people who've written appearances of Quake are Bendis and me. Like he created her, and then I've like the second most prolific Quake writer. Put that on my tombstone.
Well, so in looking at during that period of your time for you, I was shocked to find out that you hate the trans community, and that you decided to use your platform, much like you and Harry Potter, right?
Me and Harry Potter, yeah. I don't think Harry Potter hates the trans community. I've never gotten that vibe from Harry himself. I wrote X-Men and ruffled some feathers, probably rightly. I fucked up. It's a complicated thing in hindsight because it was complicated at the time. I was writing X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, and I got the job to write Uncanny. I'd been doing X-Men stuff, so I did Phoenix Resurrection, I did Astonishing X-Men, I did New Mutants, and I was just like an X-Men writer. I was just in that camp. I'd done some other stuff. I did Multiple Man, which they weren't happy that I wanted to do, but I really did, so they let me do it. We got tapped to do Uncanny. They wanted to wrap up Uncanny, so it was me, Kelly Thompson, Ed Brisson, got tapped to do a 10-issue Uncanny thing, and I was already on Astonishing and had a story, and so they came to New York and we had a summit, and they were like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I already had this thing, so like I was setting up, and Kelly and Ed were into it, thankfully, and CB and Jordan and all the editors there were into it. So we did a 10-issue X-Men thing, and then very early on it became clear, like they told us, like, we're ending X-Men because John Hickman is coming in and he is going to start a new era of X-Men. They're like, this is the end of an era of X-Men. And I was like, okay. And then very early on they were like, that's running a little late. It's so complex, and so like it's alternating artists and different books and all this, like we really need it done because nothing can misfire on that, so we need to just give them more runway, which was totally understandable. And it's one of the most ambitious projects published at a company in the last 20 years. So like when we wrapped our 10-issue thing, they were like, okay, Kelly's going to go do this thing, Ed's going to go do the X-Force, and Nat, you're going to stay on Uncanny. You're the Uncanny writer. You got 15 more issues or whatever. And I was like, cool. It was a very weird time for me, not to get too personal, but my dad was dying. My dad was in hospice. So I was writing Punisher. I was writing another book. I was writing Uncanny X-Men. And then my mom got sick. And so I was literally going back and forth between two hospitals 12 hours a day, writing scripts in their rooms while they're working, and having to turn in 20 pages every 4 days. So it was very intense and very dark. But also the marching orders from Marvel were like, Jonathan is bringing X-Men into the light. He's doing a big, bright, light rebirth of the X-Men. You're going to take them to the darkest place they've ever been. And I was like, oh, they've been to some dark places. And they were like, this is the real end of an era. And I was like, what is the start of this era? Because they have eras in their head that they're like, this is an era. And I was like, what is the start of this era? And they were like, it's new X-Men, it's Grant Morrison. And I was like, okay, so I was like, so the start of this era of X-Men in your mind is 8 million mutants being massacred on Genosha by Sentinels, and it's just the era starts with a genocide. And they were like, yes. And I was like, and you want me to go to a darker place? Darker. And they were like, Jonathan flew in and ran through everything for us, had us poke holes in it, had us ask questions, all this stuff. And so like I was well versed in what he was doing. And they were like, there's a resurrection machine. They have a resurrection device. So kill him. Just fucking murder him. And I was like, all of them? And they were like, yeah, kind of. And it was very complicated because there were some that I was like, I don't think it's going to go well if I kill some of these people. So like,
Yeah.
I was like, I flat out was like, I won't kill Storm. Like, I just won't do it. I don't want to do it. I don't think anyone wants to see it. I won't do it. And there was a few like that where I was like, I won't kill this character. I don't think this is okay. And so we ended up, Zach Thompson, Lonnie Nadler had a concurrent event, Age of X-Men. So we took a bunch of the X-Men. They had a bunch they wanted, and I had a bunch I didn't want. And so we sent a bunch of X-Men to another dimension for them. And then I had a bare bones X-Men team that the job was just to murder them. And we went out, and the first issue hit, and people fucking loved it. And it was well received, and people were very happy. And then the next issue hit, and people realized what we were doing, that I was like, yeah, some are going to die every issue. Like, they're just going to die. And fans started to turn. Some fans, it's fascinating. I mean, we could talk about that more, but like and it just got dark. And it wasn't until a long time later the retailer pointed out to me, I was at New York Comic Con, and you get, I signed for 2 hours. There's a line. Like, when I get there, there's a line, and I try and stay to sign for the whole line. I always do. So I'm staying over, but like, I'm just signing my name for 2 hours straight for a couple hundred people. And there's a very clear divide. There are people who want New Mutants and Phoenix Resurrection and Astonishing X-Men signed, and then there are people who want Uncanny X-Men signed, and they're not the same people for the most part. And I was like, this is fascinating. And a retailer said to me, it's an age divide. And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, it's people who grew up on Claremont X-Men love what you're doing in Uncanny because he took it to the darkest places. And people who grew up on the cartoons do not understand why you're fucking butchering their favorite characters that are so important to them. And I was like, oh, and then I see it all the time now when I sign stuff that people, I've had people come up to me in tears and be like, Uncanny X-Men is my favorite. You're my favorite Uncanny X-Men run. I love it. And they're always like, I'm like, you grew up on Claremont? And they're like, yes. And I have people be like, I do not like this book. And I'm like, you grew up on the cartoons? And they're like, yes.
Crazy,
but,
right?
Yeah, but that's the joy of a 70-year-old property. Like, there's different entry points for a lot of people.
True.
I don't get a lot of Stan and Jack were my introduction, but I'm always fascinated to be like, watch me murder Stan and Jack's characters. So we were killing them over and over, and it was pretty intense, but the sales were great. Marvel was really happy. We were a top book at Marvel. They were, everything was getting reprinted over and over, and we were, our sales were going up, and they were already very good, but the internet was not pleased. And then we killed Wolfsbane. A weird thing happened, that there was a reason Wolfsbane quit the X-Men in a crossover thing that I wrote, and then the crossover came out after, so people didn't understand exactly why, but that didn't matter. When Wolfsbane was killed, she says she doesn't want to be a mutant anymore, and so she is in human form, and she's just trying to live a normal human life. And she runs into some dudes who try and just hang out with her, and she's having a nice time, and then she gets sort of skittish, and a guy gets a little handsy with her, and she accidentally transforms into a werewolf. And the language they use is sort of transpanic stuff. And so
I got you.
People were like, it's a transpanic allegory. What I actually had her say, it was weird, because I felt it's one of those things where I was like, well, I don't ever set out to make comics to hurt people. I'm okay with upsetting people if the story is supposed to be upsetting, but I don't want to hurt and traumatize people. That's not ever what I want to do. And so, like, at a certain point, I had to step back and be like, oh, people are hurt and traumatized by this, and that's a fuck up, and that's my bad. And 100% I own that. Because I didn't guard my language. The line Wolfsbane says that got everyone upset. I mean, people are upset that she got killed, but the line she says is actually something that my friend, a friend of mine who was not trans but is a lesbian, was in a bar, and a guy bought her a drink, And she said, thank you. And then he came over and sat with her and she said, actually, I'm gay. And he said, are you trying to trick me? Like, is this a trap? And he hit her. And this happened to my friend. And so I was like, I talked to them and I said, can I include that in the comic? That feels very loaded. But
Yeah.
obviously it's a much more, it is a thing that anyone could say and could happen to anyone, but it is very coded to be a trans panic allegory. And I
Sure.
just was not in the headspace of that. And obviously Wolfsbane being a shapeshifter, like, feeds into that narrative of that. And, it was very intense. And I got, a lot of people screaming at me, rightly, and I got some death threats, which I would say or maybe weren't great while I was sitting in a hospice watching my dad die. Was not great for my headspace, but it's very personal for people, and I understand people get heated, and we have these jobs because people are passionate about them. So
yeah.
But also I was like, in the back of my head, I was like, but this is actually my friend's lived experience that I talked to them about, and like was a thing that upset me that happened to my friend, and I'm putting it into the work, and it isn't about you. But then, like, that doesn't matter what my intent is. Like, the thing hurt someone,
No.
so it doesn't, like, I could sit there, I could have written all that out. I've never said that story, or told that story, because I'm like, it doesn't fucking matter. Like, people were hurt by this, and people felt scared and traumatized by a thing that is a comfort to them, and like, that's the opposite of what I want to do. So whatever my intent was is bullshit. Like, I fucked up. But
I don't know. I want to challenge that. Is it bullshit? I mean, yes, you need to learn that lesson. That sounds like it's really loaded. But I think that the context is important. And I'm not saying that you need to excuse, whatever it is you're doing, but for me, as someone who, I feel like I would probably have approached this in the same way. Like, it is, I never intend to hurt anyone, and and because of my cultural background, and because of, whatever benefits I have had in this life, I oftentimes will stumble and say the wrong thing,
of
right?
course.
But I think that there's a certain amount of if I hadn't had the example of people who were saying, yes, I fucked that up, but here's why I fucked that up, and here's how I would handle that differently. I think that's important.
Look, I see what you're saying. I at the time, it got so bad and like so intense. Like, there were things that had to be submitted to Marvel security, which go to the FBI. Oof. And all that stuff. And there was like, I had to have a security consultation to be like, is it okay to do public appearances? Which, a few writers have had, and I'm lucky enough to be one of them, and in the elite ranks of, the Nick Spencers and Dan Slotts of the world.
Sure.
I agree that I wanted to say something and was like, I want to put out a statement. And Marvel's like, no, do not do that. Right. And so I went to a bunch of writers' friends and I was like, I want to put out a statement. And I remember John Hickman was like, do not put out a statement. Like, that'll only chum the waters. I was like,
right about that.
That is fair. And Al Ewing was like, how do you feel? And I was like, I feel like shit. I feel like I hurt people that I didn't want to hurt. And he was like, then say you're sorry. And I was like, oh, I'm getting a lot of answers about how to handle PR and handle a property. And I was like, I'm a Marvel Comics writer now. I'm a fucking person for all of time. And I hurt people I didn't want to hurt. And so I could have gone out and been like, I fucked up and I'm sorry. And this is why I fucked up. But that just feels like an excuse. I just said I fucked up and I'm going to do my best to do better. And I do my best to do better. I mean, I donated all my money from those issues to Trans Lifeline, and I've done a lot of fundraising for Trans Lifeline, so I'm not like before this. But so it was extra ironic to be just like, oh, here I am again, but this time it's because I instead of feeling panic for my trans friends about how the country treats them and how they're treated in the world, I'm here because I fucked up. Is a funny way to be like, hey, this donation's for my conscience.
Remember when I was helping out earlier? Yeah. Well, this is completely different.
Yeah. Remember when I used to be an ally? Now I'm buying my way back into being an ally. But like, I never talked about that or whatever. Yeah. I think, yes, I probably could have gotten some sympathy from some people who were upset by being like, here's why I did this. Language is nuanced, and there are things that can be taken in different contexts, and this is the context I approached it from, and my worldview is different. It didn't fucking matter. I don't need to earn those people's trust back. Like, if they are hurt and don't want to trust me, what I need to do is be like, I fucked up and I'm sorry, and I'm going to do my best in my life and my career to not do that again and make amends. And that's yeah,
a perfectly
any
human way of handling it. I agree with that. I think the piece that I'm getting is, maybe it's selfish. I want to hear, I want, when I'm in that same position, I want to have your experience maybe to draw on, right?
sure.
Because I'm going to end up in that place again because,
You say shitty things all the time.
I say shitty things all the time.
No, I thought a lot about it. I thought a lot about talking about that, and I was just
Yeah,
like, you know, um,
totally fair.
I was like, I'm sorry. It feels like I'm sorry, but,
Yeah.
and I was like, I don't need the but.
You don't need
Like,
but. Yeah, I'm sorry,
the butt is there to try and win me back some fans. I fucking lost
Yeah.
them, and I lost them because I fucked up, and they don't need to come back. They can find other writers who are not didn't fuck up for them, and that's fine. And like, if
Yeah.
they stumble back, like, happy to have you, and I hope you'll find that I'm better in this regard. The funny thing is, it wasn't the first problem we brought it up against, because in the first issue we kill Blindfold kills herself, and because she can see the future and she sees that they all die and she knows she's going to die a horrible death, and so she kills herself, but she also knows that she's going to be resurrected. So she kills herself, and right before, like, we were at the printer when Disney people saw it and were like, whoa, you killed a little girl kills herself. And I was like, she's not a little girl. And that's where the Marvel elasticity of time comes in, where I was like, there's no way she could be, like, she's young, but she's not a child. And they were like, she is a child. And I was like, how the fuck could she be a child? She's introduced here, like, these people are this, like, her peers are teachers at a college, how could she be a child?
Yeah.
And then they were like, well, there's not real math on it. And I was like, yeah, well, my math is that she's an adult woman who killed herself, which is fucking horrible. But anyway, Disney was not happy that a character killed themselves, and we actually had to edit the art. If you look at the spread of it, was a splash page of her dead body, and it was a full, Salvador LaRocca drew the full thing, but in the comic it's just like a close-up in an all-black thing, because that was an emergency. We didn't have time to do a redraw, we didn't have time to do an edit, and I had to go in the office for meetings on that, and was like, I fully got out and was like, hey, I'm just gonna lay this bare. Like, I didn't know this was a problem. I thought you guys knew this was happening in the story. This was in the pitches. This is, and it was a lot of just like bad communication and whatever, but it was clearly a corporate problem and going to be a PR problem. And I said to them at the time, I was like, look, when I was a little kid, like, I tried to kill myself. I'm not super proud of it. I don't ever talk about that. I would be willing to write something about that in the issue, a back matter, and like like talk with a suicide prevention counselor and talk about that. I think it's an important issue, and I like wanted to put that in here because it's a lived experience for me, and this is like a comic where I'm facing these things. Like, I'm literally facing a member of my family dying while I write a book about my childhood heroes dying. Like,
Right.
I'm putting a lot of myself into here. Like, let me own this. And Marvel's like, we don't want you to do that. And we ended up not. And then I just was immediately, there was a contingent that was just like, she killed herself, and I was really fucked up, and that was horrible. So it wasn't my first,
I think
I ended up donating all the money from that issue to suicide prevention without telling anyone. And I just like, I got to a point where I was like, man, I'm writing X-Men and I'm just taking a loss on this book. Like, the whole thing is just a wash. Like,
this is just a charity effort right here. I don't want to in any way make light of what you went through, but the irony of the fact that they said go dark under dark, go way the fuck under dark, and then you had both your parents in the hospital with your dad dying, and like, you're having to do all of this while, and of course you're gonna piss some people off because you went dark.
It was, like, it was ironic, and I understand it. Like, you in your mind have an idea of what the X-Men can do, and we're just in a different era of what that is, and what the fans are, and what the community is. And I think some people were caught off guard by the anger, but also they were like, I remember I talked to someone who was a journalist, and they were upset about the issue, and I was like, hey, if you want to talk to me about it, like, off the record, I would love to hear your opinion. Not like, I'm not trying to defend myself, I would love to hear your thoughts. And they talked to me, and they were like, at the end of it, they were like, well, I also feel bad for you because, like, everyone hates your book and it's tanking. And I was like, oh no, they're already reprinting that issue. Like, they were like, it's going to be the best-selling issue.
Yeah.
And they were like, what? And I was like, this is the thing. Like, this is the thing we don't understand. One,
Yeah.
Twitter is not sales, but also like,
Yes.
you know, I was brought in to do the Dark Fireworks show, and I gave them the Dark Fireworks show, and it sold really well. And like,
Yeah.
you know, I have people threatening to kill me, and I also have comic shops just being like, I can't keep this fucking book in stock. Like, this is insane.
It is the strangest part about being in this sort of public way of messaging the public and producing, public entertainment, is that the more you get people riled up, right?
Yeah.
You would think that they would leave, they would walk away, but that is the thing that
No,
sells.
they love spectacle.
They do love the spectacle. All right.
Uh,
You and I, thank you. I just want to thank, that was incredible. That whole story was fantastic, and I want to thank you for sharing that. I mean, because it sounds like an incredibly personally had to have been a really difficult time, and dealing with all of that public nonsense at the same time could not have been any more fun. But I do want to go back, and as much as I would love to dig deep into the stories of your times at DC as well, I want to go back and go back to something that to your Black Mask days, and then basically jump into some of your self-published stuff, right? So, and I think that because when I look at what you guys have done, it has. It's funny that you mentioned James Tynion earlier, because so much of that period feels like a time where writers are able to kind of create your own sort of cottage industries in a way that wasn't really the same. Like Substack specifically did kind of give a platform to that.
Sure.
But before we talk about that, I want to kind of talk about how one of the ways that I saw you after that you being on my radar at Valiant, the way I saw you distinguish yourself as someone, and I think part of the reason why we wanted you at Valiant was you distinguish yourself as at Black Mask and as a self-publisher and as a small press guy by really valuing those sort of retailer interactions.
Sure.
Right? One of the big things that if you go back, you Google my name, one of the first stories you're going to see is me going out there and trying to talk to every comic book retailer there is for Valiant. And you basically tried to do the same. You and I talked quite a bit about this.
Yeah. I was laughing the other day because I saw in New York Comic Con, I saw Chip Mosher for a second, and he made fun of me because he's Chip Mosher and I'm
That's
me.
what he does.
I tell myself it's because he likes me.
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
It would be so funny. It would be, change a whole lot of interactions. Sometimes he pushes you down the stairs because he thinks you're great.
Because he just loves watching you move. That's what it is.
No, but I saw Chip, and I was reminded that my first time meeting him, I went to a panel on marketing. I think he was still at Boom. I want to say it was at San Diego, and I waited afterwards for him because this is the kind of nerd I am. I'm not like waiting for movie stars to come on the panel. I was waiting for Chip Mosher, and I was like, hey, I want to talk to you about like how you market books. And I was like, because I can't get a list of all the retail stores, and I don't know how to get that. And I was like, and he's like, well, it's a pretty guarded secret. And I was like, well, what I did is I went through and manually entered every zip code into Comic Shop Locator and built a list that way.
Yeah.
And he stopped and he smiled and he was like, that's what I did when I started this job. He's like, I built a program to do it. And I was like, oh, I didn't think of building a program to do it. I just spent 2 months being like 10001, 10002. So like, obviously I was like, all right, so this guy's better at me and always will be. But also, I was amused by that because I was like, oh, I'm a kind of nerd for this stuff that I think is breathtaking. I'm a breathtaking retail nerd.
We see each other, by the way. I think that you and I and Chip, like there's a breed of us that just, I don't know why this is so fascinating to me. Like every time somebody wants to talk about how many stores there are, they always corner me. And and I can talk about it. I got like 15, 20 minutes on how many comic shops there are.
My fascination, I grew up, I mean, I'm going to go back to origin story stuff, but I grew up on the block of a comic shop. There was a comic shop on my block, as a child.
What was it called?
It was called Big Apple Comics. Great shop in Manhattan on the Upper West Side. And my parents were both writers, like I said. They did not want me going out and spending money on video games. They didn't want me going to do whatever. But if it was reading, they were like, just, give us the bill if you're trying to read. At a certain point, they were like, enough with the comics. But for a long time, that was the deal. And so the first place I ever went, my mom could watch me cross the street. I had to cross one street to get there. My mom could watch me from the window. So like I was 6 years old and going to a comic shop by myself. First place I ever went. And it was just the most magical place. And I learned, as a kid, I had a pull list that they just, my parents would come in once a month and be like, what's the damage? And here, I'd pick them up every week, but they just kept a tally. And they were like, there's the damage every month. And my pull list at one point was all Batman titles, everything Marvel, Green Arrow. And the guys... Yeah, and the guys who worked, and they just put every Marvel book in there. And the guys who worked at the comic shop.
How old are you? At 6?
No, at this I was probably like 12 or 13. Yeah. And the guys who worked at the comic shop were amazing because in my head they're like these old, like great, wise guys. But in my mind, I was like, they're probably 17. They're probably 17-year-old cards. Exactly. But they used to do things like I'd come in and they're like, you can't have your folder unless you read something else, dude. Like, you can't just do this. And so they literally like made me buy Love and Rockets. They made me buy Eastman and Laird Teenage Ninja Turtles. They made me buy issues of 8-Ball. Like, and they were like, you don't get it unless you buy this. And I'd be like, just give me my books. And they'd be like, no. And they could do that because they knew that it wasn't actually my money, that my mom was going to come in or my dad was going to come in with a credit card in 2 weeks and have no idea that I'd been bullied into buying a bunch of books I didn't want. But I have so much love for that, and so much
kidding. What an awesome gift those guys were giving you.
Yeah, 100%.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's just like buying Hate and all this, Reed Fleming, World's Toughest Milkman, and Fish Police, just like cool, like a lot of the black and white, like Boom and all that stuff, just cool books all the time. And so I've always loved comic shops. And then when I was touring with bands, a comic shop is a really unique thing. And I know you have a lot of listeners who are comic shop owners, and some of them may be sad that I say this, but most towns, the comic shop is the best indicator of a neighborhood you want to hang out in. There can be in a bookstore in a really fancy neighborhood. There can be a bookstore in a really poor neighborhood. There can be a coffee shop anywhere. You don't know what anything is. Like, the best diners in the world are in neighborhoods where like you don't want to be for one reason or the other. But a comic shop, you're always like, there's going to be a coffee shop nearby. There's going to be a cool bookstore. There's going to be a video store. There's going to be a record. Like, they're always situated in most cities in places where you're like, this is a place we can hang out for 4 hours and walk around. So when I was on tour, I was always like, what is the comic shop in town? We're going there. And then even on tour with bands who didn't want comics, they'd be like, well, I'm going to go to this coffee shop. I'm going to go sit in this diner. I'm going to go to this record store. And so I've always gravitated towards comic shops, even when I was like 16, 17, of just being like, I'm in a new town. What are the shops? Where can I go? And I use that on vacation and travel, and just like I go to a new country and I'm like, was there a comic shop in town? Like, what is it? And so I just love them. But also, when I got into making comics, I was fascinated because I ran a label, but I also worked at labels. And I was doing retail calls, which is the worst job you can do in sales. No offense. I've
done it. I've coached people to do it.
I know.
I've taught teams. I've built systems. I have I think the biggest CRM for comics retailers anywhere. It sucks. It's not a fun game.
It's not a fun gig. And it's important and it's valuable, but it's not a fun gig.
No.
And when I did it for records, we used to just have a list and we would call, and I would, sometimes you'd get the guy who wants to talk to you for 10 minutes and you give him the spiel and you're like, we have these records and we have all this and we have this. And he'd be like, that sounds cool. Who's your distributor? And you'd be like, oh, we're distributed by Ebullition and Very. And they'd be like, well, we don't carry them. And then hang up on you. And when I got to comics, and I was like, wait, there's just one distributor? Like, everyone's on a level playing field. If I call a comic shop, they can get the comic I'm talking about. And that to me was like Christmas in making comics. That was the first part. Like, going from music to comics, I was like, well, the sales are worse and the profit margins are worse and the ceiling's lower and everything about it sucks compared to the music industry in some ways. Except my joy in making it is much more, and the ability to sell things and be on a level playing field, that I was like, my book at Black Mask and Superman and Spider-Man and Batman are on the same footing. We're in the same catalog. We just have to convince the guy or the girl at the comic shop that they want to give us a chance. And that, to me, I just fell in love with that. I just latched onto that, and it felt liberating and great, and I never let that go. And so, yeah, I always hustle on comic shops for sure.
That's all. That awesome. So you did the calls, you did the thing when you're, I guess, in Black Mask. You're jamming that out.
I was marketing and press at Black Mask. I mean, Black Mask was just me and Matt Pizzola at the time. Like, people were like, oh, which isn't true. There was actually a funny thing that actually is just a weird bit of serendipity. But we realized at San Diego one year that someone came to the booth and was like, is Matt here? And they were publishing books for me and Matt Miner. I was doing sales and marketing. Matt Pizzola ran the company. Matt Harding ran production. Matt Sugarman ran legal. And Matt Rosen was the agent at the company, was the business manager.
Yeah.
And someone would come up and be like, is Matt here? And we'd all just be like, I'm Matt. And they'd be like,
present.
No,
yep,
no.
Yep.
And it was the worst. And like, it was an amazing bit of just true nightmareness to try and sort what people wanted, where we're like, do you have a legal question? Are you trying to license a property for film and TV? Was the book misprinted? Do you want something signed? Are you trying to pitch? Like, what's happening?
Was it damaged in shipping? What is it?
Literally, people would just be like, why are you asking me this? And we're just like, we're trying to figure. They're like, I'm just looking for Matt. And we'd be like,
figure out which Matt. Yeah. Finding the right Matt.
I ran sales and marketing at Black Mask for 2 years, a year and a half, which was, we built from the ground up. We built, it was just me and Pizzolo figuring out variant strategies and how to do them and fighting Diamond on them. And it was me building a press list by just like seeing who reviewed people and interviewed people and writing them down and cold emailing them and taking that retail marketing list that I'd assembled by doing a deep dive on Comic Shop Locator
10002. Yeah. That's crazy. I mean, looking back on that time, you guys did some really intense, really creative marketing. You really did. I was always impressed to watch what you all were doing. What when you look back on it, any big lessons, any big things you're proud of on that side?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating time because like it's complicated because I know that I ruffled some of the other creators at Black Mask feathers because I was doing marketing, but I was also writing books there. I was making We Can Never Go Home and 12 Reasons to Die there. And so like I was doing things that I was like, this is me, self-promotion. I paid for this myself. There was no money to do this. And then creators would be like, how come I go into a shop and there's a signed poster for your book and not my book? And I'm like, because I paid to have posters printed myself and I signed them and I paid to ship them out. Yeah. Do you want the mailing list and the name of the printer? And they'd be like, no, Black Mask should be doing that. And I was like, that's cool, but it's a micro budget company. Like it is, it's not venture capital funded. It's not like we need a book to sell to make the money. And if your book, like that's how it works. And so I know that in hindsight, I sort of regret that I was like, well, I'm not going to put my own money into promoting other people's books. Like, that's not my job. Like, my job is to take what I have to promote them. But I was putting my own money, and there's a little bit of a conflict of it. It's not a conflict of interest, but it feels, I understand why people were ruffled by it, and I feel bad about that.
It's funny. We're doing this thing with the data, and I keep getting asked, like, how can creators interact with the sales data? And I say, look, creators are, especially now, creators should be thinking of themselves as publishers. You have to be thinking of yourselves as a promoter. Promoting yourself. You're everything. Exactly. Nobody's giving you, health benefits. You have to build this for yourself.
100%.
And so, you should be thinking like a publisher. And I think that's one of the reasons I respect you is you always have. You've always approached this that way.
Thank you. I feel weird because so many people are coming from office jobs or coming from comics from, out of college and out of writing and working in a restaurant or working in a comic shop. And I came out of working in the music industry. So I was like, well, I know how to do PR. I know how to do marketing. I know what these things are. And so I just came into comics and was like, all of this stuff is easier. all of this stuff is easier to do here than it was in music. So like I'm just gonna run with it. And that was my ethos from go. I was like, I would pick up books and be like, look, I'm not gonna be a better writer than Brian K. Vaughan. He's just a better writer than me. It's like it's not it's it's equal parts craft and alchemy, and like I can craft as hard as anyone, but like my brain can't build an Alan Moore script. Like my brain doesn't do that. Brains are muscles. Like and the same reason I can't run a 4-minute mile, I can't write an Alan Moore script. That's not ever going to be what my body is capable of.
Because it's too much chocolate milk.
Well, that's why I can run a 4-minute mile, but I didn't want to brag, so I said I couldn't. No, but you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I meet people all the time who are like, I'm a great writer, and it's like, that's awesome. But like, I remember hearing, I think it was Mark Waid, and maybe it wasn't, apologies to Mark if this wasn't him, but he was like, for most people who are not weekly warriors, when they say they read comics, they maybe read a trade a month. And that means two trades of Walking Dead, 2 trades of Saga, 2 trades of Batman. You got 4 slots left. Why are you in the top 4 comics of the year for them? And that's a fucking great point. Like
it's a great point.
And maybe Mark didn't say it, and I made it up in a dream or something. So I'll take credit for it. But it's
Thank
true.
You, Dream Mark.
Yeah, thanks. I have a lot of dreams about Mark Waid. We could talk about that later.
It's easy. Don't we all, though?
Yeah,
I think at the end of the day, I think those of us who came up through comics, and every time that there's a controversy or anything, Mark is there with an opinion, and he's in our heads. I totally understand.
Yeah. Mark is he's the great Mark is funny because Mark is not someone I interact with that much, but like every single interaction I'm like, that may be the kindest person I've ever met. Like he's just been so great to me.
Same.
And so I like in my head, I'm like, me and Mark are friends. Me and Mark are not friends. Like Mark is never, but I think so warmly of him and so fondly of him that I'm like, me and Mark are pretty tight.
You are his friend. He may not be your friend. That's really the key. Is it's a you can feel that one way. I think.
Yeah,
so.
It's fine.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry.
no. So like my decision early on was just like I'm never gonna be. If you put me in a room with 10 writers, I'm probably not gonna be the best writer in the room. But I sure as fuck can control being the hardest working writer in the room. I can hustle the most in the room. I can, put in the hours. Like that's something I control. I can stay up. I can forego having interests. I can, which, I know that this is a hot button debate on Twitter last week and whatever. We don't need to get into, people's hours and what they work. But like, I love my job. I'm passionate about my job. It's the only thing I want to do. And I love comics. So like, it's all part of the same thing that it's like, well, what do you do in your free time? Like I watch movies, but mostly I read comics, or I go to the park and read comics. And like, I listen to records while I read comics. And then other than that, I make comics. Like that's, and people are like, well, that's not healthy. And I'm like, no, it's probably fucking not, but it's what I like, like I'm not super into drugs. I don't drink. I'm not into dog fighting. I like comics.
I like that. That's the limit. That's the all of human experience.
Yeah. Those are. I'm such a comic nerd that I don't know what people are into. Other than I'm like, I don't know.
Do with your lives.
What is it? The Super Bowl? That's a dog fighting thing. Oh, gross. No, not for me. But so I've always had that ethos of just being like, well, I can go out there, and it's coupled with a love of comic shops. I think the comic shops are a magical place. I think that there's nothing in the world like a good comic shop, and by a good comic shop, it means a bunch of different things. Like I love a desert island. I love a secret headquarters. I love a curated, beautiful, like everything in here. If I walk it up to the counter, they'll tell me why it's good and I should own it. I love that. I think that's the greatest. But I also love long boxes on the floor, lights don't exactly work, water stains on the wall, but like, man, you're gonna find some stuff that no one has sold or read or thought about in 25 years. Like that's a dream for me. I love that. 100%. I love deep diving. So like when I say a good comic shop, it doesn't people are always like, oh, you mean like a Third Eye? And I love Third Eye. I love Steve. I love everything they do. But like, and yes, that's a great comic shop, one of the best in the world, arguably the best in the world. But I also mean I'm not going to say signal someone out to be like this dirty hole in the wall, but I also mean the dirty hole in the wall. I love the dirty hole in the wall.
Right.
They're just serve different purposes, but like I love that space, and I love the idea of like getting in there, walking in there and finding a thing and falling in love with it. And like the only other spaces we have like that are, you know, like record stores, which I love. And you know, it used to be video stores, and that's not a thing anymore really.
100%.
But like you could just go in and, you know, and bookstores obviously, but like, you know, just go in and anything you're into, there's something to fill that need and occupy, and something you can fall in love with every single week. There's nothing else like that in the world. And I, you know, like I love baseball, and you know, it's cool. You get 162 games a year. If you root for more than one team, you can double that, like whatever. But like, it's not the same. You get 4 months of baseball. You get 5 months of baseball, and whatever. This is every week year round. There's another thing that could be your favorite thing ever. That's amazing. That's magical. I don't have another way to put it. So I'm obsessed with them, and I do everything I can to try and boost them and keep them alive and get people into them.
You and me both, man. If there's one distraction, I think in my life, one kind of guiding principle, it's been these comic shops. There's just, I don't know what it is. I think I love comic shops more than I love comics. I'll be honest.
I do. You know? I do love, you know, like we're talking, me and a bunch of other pros are talking about doing a signing tour in the beginning of next year. And I am constantly like, you know, we could hit 4 a day. And everyone is like, what the fuck are you saying? And I'm like, I've done it. Like, you know, when Uncanny X-Men, when Uncanny X-Men came out, me and Ed Brisson did, I think, 26 shops in 5 days.
Jesus.
It's great. I was a tour manager, so I was like, we have to be on the road at this time. This is the drive times. The only one we fucked up was Jetpack in New Hampshire, which is one of the best shops in the world that I love. But we every mapping program, everything I'd looked at, all my life experience did not prepare me for Boston traffic. Getting out of Boston, I was just like, the map program says we have 2 hours. I'm giving us 4 because it's Boston, and it was 6.5. And I was just like,
100%.
I was just like watching it, and I was like, well, we've been in the car for half an hour, and we're now an hour further behind than we were. It was a nightmare.
You'll be like driving, I got to get over there. I can see where I'm going.
Yeah.
But the map says it's going to take me 2 hours because I have to like go around it for some reason.
Boston great town, weird. Great comic shops. Amen. Worst place to drive on earth.
100%.
You know, I look, I respect them for not making it really easy or possible to leave their city, for it to just be like a never-ending maze where the Minotaur's hunting you through the streets of Boston as you try and escape. Like, good for you. That's a lot of city pride. New York says get the fuck out when you're here. Boston tries to hold on to you, and I respect that, but man, it did not make our lives better.
All right, well, I'm with you on that. All right, so let's talk. We're having talked about comic shops. I want to talk about comics publishing. So you've done plenty of freelance work. You've been a big writer. You've been worked on the biggest books there are. But you also, as we talked earlier, I think really during COVID, is it really the Substack deal? Is the Substack deal what began Ashcan Press, or was that?
So no, Ashcan Press was a name. My old writing partner, Patrick Kinlan, who's a great writer, amazing writer, and doing great stuff at Image and a bunch of other places. We had a misguided idea that when we pitched things, it would be cool if it looked very professional. And we were like, it would be cool if it looked like it was a published book, which obviously is dumb and should not look like it's already been published. And so we made a fake logo, and the name was Ashcan Press, which was a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge to be like, we just make pitches. It was also sort of tongue in cheek because we were like, we don't make comics, we just make pitches at this point. We were just endlessly pitching. At one point, I hired a bunch of great artists to do ads for fake books that we were never going to make, fake covers. And there was a section in the back of our pitches that says, when you reject this is the next pitch you're going to get from us after you're finished rejecting this. Which, like, at this point, we were antagonizing and saying fuck you to editors who were the only lifeline we had. But we were that. But we had, like, you know, just really I know there was one called The Plot to Kill Ronald McDonald, and it was like this, like it was like a Day of the Jackal movie poster of like a sniper scope on Ronald McDonald, but he was like, it was really weird. There was just a bunch that were just like, we would just have weird fever dreams of fake titles for projects and get like Ben Mara and people like that to just draw them and make fake, this is our next pitch. But so that was all part of Ashcan Press, and then it just was my social media handle and I kept it, but I never wanted to be a publisher after. The goal was always to be, I was like, I don't want to run a self-publisher. We talked about it a lot, and I thought about it, and we did like small run self-published comics for cons at the start. Like my first ever con I did New York Comic Con with like 5 issues of fully self-published stuff. But then we sort of retired that idea, and it just was my handle on everything, and I thought it was a funny ode to being a guy who just makes pitches and never makes books. And then when it came time, when the Substack stuff started to come together, I was like, oh well, I'll just do Ashcan Press. Like I have that, so that's just going to be the banner. So that's it. That's where it came from. We're not, people are very confused by it. People are like, well, is it a publisher? And I'm like, no, it's just me and the people I work with. And
what exactly distinguishes you and the people you work with from a publisher?
Well,
because
other people are going to
publishers do.
Other people are going to publish the books.
Oh, okay.
When the books are made, they go to actual real publishers and not people who just pretend to be publishers. Yes, it's so like people are like, well, is it an imprint? And I was like, I don't need an imprint. Like, it's a branding tool. Like, it's weird in the same way that like. It's funny because James has come up a bunch, but like Tiny Onion is the sort of inverse of what I'm doing, because James is like, well, it's a brand and it's not a publisher, and people are like, well, you are publishing stuff, and he's like, well, sort of, but it's not a publisher, and it's not just him, it's other people's stuff. And I was like, this is just me. So like together we're both ends of like, we're not a publisher, but we're something else. But there's, like you look at Image and there's Giant Generator and Ghost Machine and all these people who are doing great things that are imprints. I don't want that. We're not really that. It's mostly just, I see a lot of people who are like, I made a Facebook page for my comic. I made a Twitter account for my comic. I made a website for my comic. And I was like, that's great, but you're going to have another comic in 6 months and you're going to have to build that audience up again. I made a Facebook page for everything I do. I made a Twitter page for everything I do. And it's just a catch-all. It's just easier. So we just have Ashcan Press, and it's like, well, if you like Four Kids Walk Into a Bank, you can read about it on my site, and that's where it is. If you like What's First Place From Here, you can read it. If you want to see the new stuff that's coming next year, like that's where it's going to be. You can read about it. That's where you can find it and buy it. So it's just a catch-all.
It's remarkably, especially when you look at the website, it's remarkably utilitarian.
Oh yeah.
Right? The website is literally just a shopping cart. There's no about us. There's no video trailer. Well, there's just the shop. Here's a bunch of stuff we've made. Some of it's sold out. You can buy some right now. That's it.
There's different versions. So this is a problem of like me being like, well, I'll just do everything myself, and being like pretty bad at web stuff. So there is, if you go to ashcanpress.com, it's like there's a Substack landing page, and then there's a separate thing that's like the shopping cart thing that's different.
I went to the Ashcan Press. I mean, I don't want to tell you your business, but I went to ashcanpress.com today, and it was just the shopping cart. It went straight to the shopping cart, and that was it.
Well, maybe it's broken. I might have broken it. Doesn't matter. It's not super important. I don't know what to like. Look, as much as I hustle and promote, I fucking loathe self-promotion. I loathe it. I hate doing it. It makes my skin crawl. It makes me feel awful. I hate calling shops and telling them why they should. I've had shops make fun of me because they're like, in a retail email, you're supposed to say like, you should be stocking this. This is going to be the excitement. And they were like, and your emails are always like, if you think you can sell this, here's information. Like,
order it, maybe.
Yeah, and I some of that comes from me working at a shop, like working at Forbidden Planet, doesn't sell back issues, and like I used to go and be like, I'm excited about this book to Jeff, who was the buyer, and be like, I'm excited about this book. You should carry it. And then if I can't sell all those books, I put them in a box and they are not sold and it's lost.
Forever.
And so I have real anxiety about stock on shelves. Like, and I know there's back issue stores and that's a different system, but they still make me anxious. And so I never tell a store like, you need to be stocking more of this. You should carry it. I'm always just like, how can I help you sell the stuff you're going to order? You know what you're going to sell better. Like, I've never been in your shop in Des Moines, but like, I would be a fucking moron if I called you and told you like you should be getting 100 of these. Like you shouldn't. I almost definitely you should not. So like, are you getting 2? Are you nervous about that? Well, what do you want me to do to help you sell the 2?
Let's just start with 1, and I'll sign it for you. Can I do a video or something for you?
Yeah,
I want you to sell the 1.
Look, if someone wants to take 1, I did that when I did Hawkeye. When I was doing Hawkeye at Marvel, I was like, I'll make videos for your store if you just ask me to. Like, I'll just do it. And I did, I think, 29 videos, which as you watch them, they get progressively crazier and crazier. I also did them outside at my mom's house, and it was winter. And so I'm like getting colder and more deranged as they go. So the first ones are like really upbeat, and I'm talking about the book. And then the last ones, I'm just like, oh, Hawkeye.
Buy it.
Yeah. But I had a store reach out to me, and they were like, hey, man, we would love a video from you. But truth be told, like, we're only buying 1 copy of the book. And I was like, I don't care. Like, I'll make the video. And I made the video for them. And they were like, we sold out. We're reordering it. And I was like, cool.
Okay, thanks.
Got 2. You know, like, that's my feeling. Like, if you want to spend $2 on something I made, like, I owe you my time. I owe you my energy for sure. I'm happy to give it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that attitude. And I also think it's really interesting when I look at the stuff that you produced. You have, I mean, there's a quality to your work. There's a quality to the way you market yourself, right? That is that it could be kind of stereotypical. It could be very like I don't know, like Jack Black in High Fidelity, like this is too cool for you, kind of, you know, it could come across as that, and it doesn't.
Sure. Oh, thank you.
And you could be too good for like variant covers and shenanigans and you know, albums and all of it, but you are not. You still love that part of it, and I respect that.
I literally had this conversation with friend of the room Brian Hibbs the other day.
Yes.
Literally variant covers. I was talking to Brian, and someone came up to me and were like, excuse me, are you this is at New York Comic Con. Someone said, are you Matthew Rosenberg? And I said, yeah. And they were like, oh my God. And I was like, you calm down on that. That's not that exciting. And then they were like, you know, I love We Can Never Go Home. And they were like, I have every single variant cover for it. And I was like, oh, thank you so much. And I meant it. And it was a really nice moment. And I thanked them, and they walked away. And Brian said, does that make you feel weird that their touchstone on it was not the story, was the variant covers? Which I totally understand his point.
Sure.
And I just said, no, you know, like I made those too. Like you know, like I don't have a lot of connection to a Marvel or DC variant cover. Like, I don't often see them. Like I get at Marvel, you don't see them. Like you don't get comps of variants. I don't know what they are. You'll see when a Marvel creator signing, they're often looking at their books a lot longer because they're getting art in front of them they've never seen.
Yeah.
They just have no idea it exists. DC sends you everything, so you see all the comps. So like I at least see them, but I have no connection to them. I don't know the people who made them. I don't know why they made them. I don't know anything about them, and I don't have any approval on them. Some of them are amazing and beautiful, and some of them are not to my taste. On a creator-owned book, it's like, oh, I'm asking people I like to draw characters I created and put it on covers. Like that's the coolest shit on earth. Like
awesome.
Yeah. When we started What's the First Place From Here, Tyler was like, maybe we shouldn't do variants. And I was like, why? And he was like, I don't know. Like, let's just be story forward. And I was like, the book is story forward. The book is a story. Like, and if you want to read the story, you just have to buy the book. And I was like, don't you want to see cool people draw your characters? And he was like, I guess. And then I was like, well, I already lined up a bunch. So like, this isn't actually a conversation we're having. But I was like, Bendis is drawing one. And he was like, Brian Bendis is drawing our characters? And I was like, yes. And he was like, that's fucking cool. I was like, yeah, it's fucking cool. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, I have a new book coming out, and like, literally, Jacob Phillips sent me a cover yesterday. Tyler Boss sent me a cover 2 days ago. And we also have like a person, it's their first ever published work doing a cover. And I was like, I saw their stuff. I was like, your stuff's cool. Do you want to do a cover? And they were like, does it pay? And I was like, of course. What do you want to get paid? And they were like, could I get this much? And I was like, 100%. There you go. I'll pay you as soon as you send me the file. And they sent it. It's their first published work. And it's like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's such an honor. So like, yeah, no, I love that stuff. I think that stuff's great.
Yeah,
and you know, like I'm not here to judge why people I'm the writer. Would I always prefer that people like the story? Sure. But like, you know, if I ran a restaurant, I'd be like, well, I hope you like the food. But if you come here because you like the drinks, or you like the prices, or you like the atmosphere, or you think the waiter's cute, or you know, like it's by your house, like I don't care what gets you in. Come in, have a nice time. I'm happy you're at the restaurant. Like, it's fine. I'm the chef. I would rather you were here for the love of the food, but I'm happy if you're here because we have free Wi-Fi. Like, that's fine.
That is the perfect analogy. I have Brian's actually on the list of my future interviews, and I have to tell you that I am both looking forward to it and I'm very nervous that I'm just going to spend 2 hours arguing with him. And
sure, but arguing with Brian is great.
It is.
Arguing with Brian is fun. It's funny. Brian, not to go off on Brian. Brian has this reputation of being curmudgeonly. I don't think I'm telling tales out of school.
I don't think so.
And so I know creators who are like, I'm nervous about that guy. He's always got an opinion. He's always got a hot take. And I was like, about as welcoming and kind and supportive of 100%. The medium as a human you will find on earth. I was like, Brian has been supporting me from the start, has a lot of opinions on what I do, has a lot of criticism. Some of it is really great and I've taken to heart. Some of it is really not for me. And like, it runs the gamut. I'm always excited to hear what he has to say. I always want his opinion. And he's always had my back, and I will always have his back. I order from his store all the time. I send people who are going out there to his shop. I love the store. I love what he does. And I'm just like, yeah, we shouldn't be afraid of passion in this industry. Like, this is an industry that, like I said before, it entirely runs on passion. So when someone is passionate and has opinions, like, give them the chance. Like, that's what keeps us all alive here.
100%. Well, this has been incredible. This is blown past my the time is just like I've still got 2 pages of questions I wanted to ask you, but I
talk too much. I get it.
I need to be respected of both of our time. No, this has been too much fun.
I have to go sort through all my comics to give out to the kids because it's Halloween.
It is Halloween.
That's what I give out comics every year.
I'll be honest,
all the single issues I give out.
I have a couple things I have to do before I go out and trick or treat as Grunkle Stan from Gravity Falls.
Sure.
So I don't know if you know the show, because it's not comics. I guess they do have comics. Maybe, maybe someday you'll read them. You know,
maybe
that's fine.
I know people love it.
It's true.
It looks cool.
Is there anything else we haven't covered today that you want to?
No, this is everything. That was the complete summation of my life.
We really did. We hit all the big high points. Frankly, I think everything else you've done has been.
Pretty. I think we even talked about some of the mess stuff here. So like, yeah, we went too far.
We probably went too deep. That's right.
No, I really appreciate it. This was really fun. Like I said, I haven't done very much or any press. I've turned down almost all press for the past year. Only when DC was like, you have to go promote DC vs. Vampires, did I do some interviews, but I haven't done interviews in more than a year before that. And this was the one I wanted to do because we never chat, we never hang out.
I know.
But I also
we both live in New York.
We do. I never leave my house, so it's a little hard. But also, like, I really love what you do, both on the show, but also in general, and I support it. And I think these are important conversations to have, and I think people, I like people asking questions and forward thinking about the industry and what its place is and what its place will be. And so I did none of that on here, but I like that it exists, so I wanted to come and derail it for a little bit so you can get it back on track next week.
I really appreciate you making that challenge that for me, because it's it's good to mix it up for me.
Sure, yeah.
I don't want to always be contributing to forward.
No, look, a podcast is only as good as its bad episodes. So I wanted to make sure you had some real stinkers. I was like, all his episodes have been entertaining and interesting. Let me go and mess the whole thing up. And so I'm proud to do that for you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I think you nailed it. Where can people find you? Where can they find Ashcan Press, that is apparently your Gnome Publishing?
Yeah, I have a newsletter. That's really my home base where I do you can get my podcast and I give updates about stuff. I try not to flood people's inboxes. So it's really just like once a week you get a podcast. And then sometimes when there's something important, you'll get an update. I have Ashcan Press on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Blue Sky. I'm done. I'm not doing anymore. So when they invent the next one, I'm not doing it. So if you want to see me on social media, I barely want to do those, and by that I mean I don't. But I am there, so you can always interact with me. But yeah, just the Substack, ashcanpress.substack.com or just ashcanpress.com should work. And when I get off here, I'm going to see why it doesn't work and fix it. And yeah, you can go and you can buy some comics, you can sign a newsletter, and yeah, I have a bunch of new creator-owned stuff coming out early next year. So I am going to be banging the drum on that and pushing it, and probably doing other interviews that I also ruin people's podcasts on. So
that's
look out for those.
I appreciate you putting in that effort. Maybe we'll come back and I'll get to my other two pages of stuff, and we can actually promote something. I hate promoting shit though. It feels wrong.
It doesn't feel good to me.
Yeah.
I'd rather just talk, but we can do whatever. Yeah, anytime, man.
Whatever.
Anytime you want to chat.
Hi again. Thanks so much for watching Comic Industry Insiders. It, as always, is our pleasure to talk to the movers and shakers of comics and to bring you those conversations. We'd love it if you'd support us with a like and subscribe, and telling your friends is always good, but really what we want to do is hear from you. Any questions, any suggestions you have about our show, any suggested guests, frankly, anything at all, we'd love to hear from you. Our producer is nearly always Stephanie Gerk, and our researcher is Anthony Militano, who makes me look much smarter than I am. All right, guys. Thanks so much. Namaste, y'all.